Plus, Arthur Young's wife, who was a Forbes, her close friend was a woman who was the mistress of Allen Dulles for many years, the head of the CIA.
Yeah, yeah.
So we have yet a further connection. So when Ruth Paine, the woman who was staying with the Oswalds, or the Oswalds were staying, she went and visited Arthur Young and the family in August and September of 1963, only a couple of months before the assassination. And yet this information never comes out during the Warren Commission hearings, the testimony, when Ruth Paine was talking about her background and what she had been doing and what she had been trying to do. Allen Dulles would cut her off every time she got close to this information because he was part of the Warren Commission, one of the commissioners. So what is this all about? You know,
yeah.
we do we look at a conspiracy of individuals, or we look at some kind of supernatural cabal that was behind this terrible event in American history?
You know, I get the sense kind of that these families, in that sense, kind of are operating, I guess, as the administrators of. If we are to just talk about America in this sense, I mean, these are powerful families in regards to industry and politics, just as you say. And do you think that they actually might have risen to that rank in regards to, you know, their wealth and fortune, so to speak, because they actually have had this kind of contact with other beings, if you will?
It's an interesting concept. I don't know quite how to answer it. I know that where the Astors are concerned, the Astor family, of course, is famous on both sides of the Atlantic. There are the Astors in the UK and the Astors in America. It's the same family, just two different branches. I know that during the Profumo affair, which also took place in 1962 and 63, in which a minister of defense in the United Kingdom was found to have been involved with a call girl. And the call girl was also sleeping with a Russian KGB agent, so it caused the downfall of the British government at that time. A lot of parties were being held at the Astor's estate at Cliveden in the United Kingdom. And one of the people who was the center of this was a man called Stephen Ward. Stephen Ward was kind of the procurer, you might say. He was the friend of all of the girls who were involved in the call girl operation. And he was believed to have been involved in the occult very heavily. When he died, he committed suicide rather than go to jail for his role in the affair. They called in an exorcist to exorcise the house where he was living. I mean, there's always been some kind of strange occult connection between the Astor family and the occult in general. We can't quite figure out what that means because, of course, penetrating the Astor family is rather difficult, trying to understand all of their secrets. But there does seem to be this fascination between, you know, with the Astor family and occult forces. I believe John Jacob Astor had written books about spiritual things before. I believe he was the one who went down on the Titanic. So there are all sorts of strange associations with the Astors. And as far as the Forbes and the DuPonts, that's another whole story. I mean, there's a lot of occult history with the old wealthy families. And whether they became wealthy because of the occult or whether they were wealthy first and used that money to investigate the occult, in my mind, at this stage of the game, it doesn't matter which came first, the horse or the cart, but obviously they have had quite an influence and are still having quite an influence in our political life. Yeah, indeed. In regards to that, do you necessarily see this as something negative, to be, I guess, in quotes, dabbling, with the occult, or do you think that we as a human race actually could learn something from this? I mean, in regards to, I guess, more the shamanistic ways that you spoke of earlier. In regards to that, there are numerous stories going back to the shamans actually extracting useful information while they are in contact with these spirits and so forth. Do you have a kind of a negative or positive, connotation on this aspect of it? Well, from my own point of view, I've always regarded organized religion with suspicion. It's as though we relegate the care of our souls to a human organization, and my experience with human organizations has not been that positive. I'm not exactly sure, what human being I would entrust with my soul, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
So I generally prefer. Well, think about it. We have so many scandals in the United States in recent years involving heads of major religious organizations, Protestant organizations, Catholic organizations. I mean, there's no way that you could reasonably be expected to surrender, the care and taking of that immortal or spiritual part of yourself to people who are engaged in all sorts of unsavory behavior. So, from my point of view, direct spiritual experience is always preferable. The problem is, of course, it takes effort, and it takes a bit of education in the sense of having to learn the safeguards, having to learn what the spiritual experience means, learning how to interpret it or understand it. So it's a lot of personal responsibility.
Yeah.
But from my point of view, what greater task do we have? So I believe that studying the occult may actually be a good thing for the rest of us. It may empower us and give us back control of the spiritual part of our lives and take it away from people who have shown to us that they are not really worthy of being in charge of it themselves.
Yeah, indeed. What about the connection between the U.S. and the Nazis? I guess we could go back to talk about the paperclip and stuff like this, connecting, I guess, OSS, the foundation, going over to CIA and so forth. But do you go into the Nazi connection with the U.S. in Sinister Forces at all?
Well, I do, of course. In Unholy Alliance I did in the book directly about the Nazis, but then I expanded that considerably in Sinister Forces, because the more I researched things like Operation Paperclip, the more shocked I became, and my hair gradually turned whiter with each new revelation. For instance, not only the Nixon, but the Bush family. This is something that no one talks about on CNN or any of the news stations. They never have, and I guess they never will. And it's something that is deeply disturbing to me. The Bush family, going back to the 1920s and 1930s, the grandparents of the current president, were very involved with the Nazis. I mean, involved to the point where the U.S. government had to shut them down in 1942 under the Trading with the Enemy Act, because their companies were actively involved in supporting the Third Reich. Now, we're talking about families like the Bush family, Prescott Bush, the Walker family, Brown Brothers Harriman, which was one of their companies. All of George Herbert Walker and Prescott Bush were major supporters of the Third Reich. They financed a bunch of German scientists to come over to the United States in the 1930s to talk about eugenics, which is essentially race science, especially in the Nazi point of view. And their idea was to clean up the human race by getting rid of undesirables. So the Bush family was directly involved in supporting that kind of those conferences in the United States. So there's a history there. And then we have the Nixon situation, where Nixon, after the end of World War II, was sent to Washington, D.C., where he worked, as we later found out, going over the captured German documents and files. It is assumed that he found something in those German documents which made Allen Dulles befriend him right away. We know that Allen Dulles was involved in discussions with high-ranking Nazis during the war. And we also know that Allen Dulles had virtually no objections to the Holocaust, as is exposed in his in the transcripts of his meetings with the Nazis. He really didn't care much one way or the other about the death camps. He just wanted the Nazis to surrender. So it's possible that Nixon uncovered something about Dulles, and Dulles, to keep Nixon quiet, started to support him as a candidate in Congress, because Nixon basically was a very unattractive candidate for many reasons. But suddenly he had a lot of money behind him, a lot of oil money, a lot of old money behind him, and Dulles' support for the race that he ran against Helen Gahagan Douglas in California, where he eventually became a senator, and then from there went on to become president eventually. So vice president and then president. So there was a definite connection between Nixon, Dulles, and Paperclip, the Nazis, and we don't really know all the ramifications of it yet. There's just a lot of smoking guns And investigators like me are still working on that.
Yeah. It is a history that's somewhat clouded, but as you say, it feels like more and more is coming out and it's becoming known, even if that all of it might be spin or whatever. But I mean, do you think that there is a connection also to, I guess, the birth of the CIA in connection to the Nazis that went over to the U.S.?
Oh, sure. I mean, from our records and from the records that are being declassified almost every day, we've been discovering that the kinds of Nazis we brought over were not only rocket scientists, but were also involved in medical experimentation. Most of those wound up at Randolph Air Force Base, where they created a department of aviation medicine, as it was called. But these were people who were responsible for some terrible crimes during the Holocaust. We had Nazis involved in our political life. We had ex-Nazis and ex-SS officers involved in raising money for the Republican Party during the Cold War. We had Ronald Reagan, for instance, giving speeches to the World Anti-Communist League and supporting the World Anti-Communist League, which was a notorious hotbed of Nazis and neo-Nazis. We've had Nazis in virtually every aspect of our political life after World War II, including running